Listen, grief doesn't have to be grim. That's why when I talk about it on this podcast, it's about dealing with grief and loss in a way that influences the changes you want to make in your life. As you heal, what do you want to do next? Make a professional pivot, end a toxic relationship or friendship? I want you to have the confidence to navigate change. These are real stories from my one-on-one coaching sessions and my inspiring interviews with change makers. I'm Marceia Cork, the change coach, and this is Ooh, those effing C words. Hello, MCs. Welcome back to another episode of Ooh, those effing C words. I am Marceia Cork, the change coach, and I've been having some amazing conversations with Blacks in unconventional careers in sports, entertainment, TV, film. I can't decide today if I'm more excited about my guest's career as a podcast executive or to just talk reality TV. She and I have the same guilty pleasure. That's reality TV. She says she's a self-proclaimed reality TV addict. So today's guest is an executive producer of entertainment podcasts at Sony Music Entertainment. Prior to that, she was the executive producer for the More Sauce podcast label at SiriusXM. There, she oversaw existing shows by our faves in reality TV, Porsha Williams, Tamar, Braxton, and she developed and launched Reality with the King with the Carlos King, who's affectionately known as the King of Reality Television. That podcast hit #1 on Apple Podcasts just 2 days after launching and has since gone on to be nominated along with several other of her shows for the coveted Ambies Award. So, Jazmine, I can't wait to get into your reality. Welcome to the show. This is Jazmine Henley-Brown.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. And I love when people do like research and everything is like up to date and accurate. Kudos. I love that. As a producer, I'm like, oh, so good.
Yes, I got to be on my P's and Q's today. I'm so glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. Yeah, thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you. All right. So these conversations, my listeners are used to them just kind of taking a past, present, future kind of format. So this is really going to be about your backstory. I would like to start with, I always say, little Jazmine Brown, so to speak. If there was any moment in your childhood or early years, series of moments, exposure to one or many people that kind of shaped the work that you would do today, what would that be?
There's so many moments,
Okay.
honestly. Like, I really feel like I had a childhood that completely cultivated the person that I am today and really helped to shape me into this person.
Okay.
I talked a lot. Like, I said my first words when I think I was 4 months.
Ooh,
My mom loves telling this story. She used
okay.
to, like, every morning she would come in my room and she would be like, "Hey, girl. Hey, girl." She said she came in my room one day and I was like, "Hey, girl." And that
Oh.
was just kind of like the start of that. So, yeah, I would talk her and my dad's head off when I was little and,
Mhm.
various family members, my cousin, so my second cousin, my mom's first cousin, so she's my mom's age. She always tells a story of like, I will always just be talking to you and it'll be a few minutes in and I'll look at your mom like, "Why am I talking to her? Why am I talking to a kid?" Because I would just talk so much. So I was always a
Uh-huh.
very talkative and
A
curious
old soul.
person.
Mhm.
Huh?
I said a old soul.
Yeah, and just,
Yeah.
I had a lot to get out and I had a lot of questions about everything. So that's really what started kind of, I think the boldness and like the confidence that you need to like have a really unconventional career as I have. And yeah, I've had like a lot of teachers along the way that really just saw something special in me and would give
Mhm.
me, extra homework or different types of homework from my classmates. When I got a little older, I would start like getting in trouble in class a little bit, and they would tell my mom like, "She's so smart, but she distracts, other students."
We all have that
Um,
story, don't we?
uh-huh,
It's a
uh-huh. So
distraction to the
my like
class.
little go ahead.
I said it's a distraction to the class. She's a
It
joy,
is.
but she's a distraction to the class.
Yes, exactly, exactly. That's what my report cards would say, like, "Very smart, talks too much."
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
that was always it. So, um, there isn't one one singular moment that just completely turned everything around. I will say, I'm so thankful to my parents because I think they just from day one saw that I was just an outgoing and,
Mhm.
boisterous child,
Okay.
and they just let me be that forever. And so, yeah.
Okay. All right. So give me some history into the path then, when you decided on a path in entertainment. If you didn't know it was going to be specifically in podcasting, because who does?
Right.
Um, but how did you settle on a career in entertainment?
Um, actually that's probably, when we talk about things or moments that shaped you, when my mom used to take me to the grocery store, I used to always read Vibe magazine, like Vibe, Essence, Ebony, all that. But I
Mhm.
especially loved Vibe because I love music. And they had a thing in the back called like 20 questions or 21 questions. And so I
Okay.
will always like try to read that in the grocery store. And so I went to college for fashion marketing.
Mm.
And it's really just because like people will always say I knew how to dress. And so when it was coming time to kind of choose what you were going to do after high school,
Mhm.
people just assumed that I was going to school for fashion. And I was so young and I didn't know what my path was going to be. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to school for fashion. And
Mhm.
so I went and I just quickly found out that like while I like dressing myself, I don't care about any other aspects of
Yeah.
fashion.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a little bit and then I started working and I just started doing some freelance writing, like freelance journalism, because I always knew how to write. Um, and I got accepted as an intern, hired as an intern for Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week in New York.
Ooh.
And yeah, this was 2012.
Okay.
And I was gonna be an intern there and I was living in Milwaukee at this point. And I had told my mom, I'm like, I've never lived in New York. I think I should just move there.
Mhm.
And like I told you, my parents are very supportive of me. So my mom's like, New York is scary, but I support you, go. And so I went there, interned Fashion Week. It was great. That was over. I started interning at the People's Revolution, which is with Kelly Catrone. It's a fashion PR house. And I was
Okay.
doing that and it was great. And I was like, oh, but I think like I really want to get into music and entertainment.
Okay.
I'm very long-winded, Marcia. I'm so
No,
sorry.
no, no, I love it. In fact, I'm gonna have you go back and repeat some of it so I can tie it all together. So go ahead. I
Okay,
love
yes.
it.
If I'm getting too long-winded, just let me know though.
No, 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 we're all
Um,
good.
so I was doing the fashion PR internship and I was like, I really want to get into music and entertainment and Vibe. I was living in New York and like I wanted to intern at Vibe. And so
Mhm.
I like thought I found their address. I took, the couple of articles and things that I had written by then
Mhm.
in like a paper portfolio. This like, it was, a while ago. And
Mhm.
I went to what I thought was Vibe's offices. Turns out that was their old offices. And this guy
Mhm.
let me in and I'm like, I'm here for Vibe. He's like, Vibe isn't at this building anymore. And I'm in this room with this man that I don't know, and I'm at the
Mm.
wrong place. And like it could have turned out so
Yes.
horribly. But
Yes.
he was like, I can tell you how to get there though. So he told me how to get there. I went to their actual offices
Which
by
sounds
Union
just as
Square.
scary.
Right? But typical New York story, I'm telling you, everybody in New York will, like, tell you a story like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I went to Vibe, I dropped off my portfolio, um, then a couple of days later, I got an email that they wanted me to come in and interview for the internship. Long story less long, I got the internship. I was there that same summer, I interned at, it was Clear Channel back then, it's iHeart now.
Okay.
And this
Mhm.
was like I really wanted to work, intern on The Breakfast Club. But all of the interns wanted to intern on The Breakfast Club.
Okay.
So,
Mhm.
I ended up getting an internship on DJ Clue's show. That wasn't really working for me, and when I was about to quit, the intern coordinator was like, "Hey, something just opened up at The Breakfast Club. Do you wanna take it?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Yes." And then I was interning at The Breakfast Club for, like, the second half of the semester. I went in with the intention, that I wanted to learn how to be an on-air host because
Mhm.
by that time I was writing, I was doing journalism, but I was like, I want to try my hand at journalism, but I also want to try my hand as an on-air host. Like I want to learn both of these things at the same time.
Okay.
So when I was interning with the Breakfast Club, I started I was doing production, like a production internship.
Mhm.
And that part was really fun and unexpected because it was like, oh, the producers kind of create the whole show. And like the producers like direct the talent a lot and they book the talent and like they create the story that you're going to tell
Mhm.
throughout this radio show. And so production became kind of a thing for me and it was specifically in
Mm.
radio. So I did both of those internships. Excuse me. Then I ended up leaving New York and went to Atlanta where I was doing real estate, and then I ended up getting hired as an executive producer for a digital radio station um, called Boss FM. What?
Wait, okay, so you just threw real estate in there real fast.
I needed money. I needed money. It like working in media, I'm telling you, is I'm just now starting to like really make money.
Yeah.
And I've been working in this industry for 10 years, 11 years now. I'm just now at a point where like I make really good money, but it was a struggle bus for a long
Yes,
time.
yes, yes. So
So,
I just had a very similar conversation with Lady T, Tiffany Watson, who,
mhm.
you know her, she does the segments on Fox 45. Yeah, no, she had a similar story, working all over, just driving, commuting, living everywhere, and barely making any money, just taking all kinds of, projects and still not making any money. So I hear this very similar story
Mhm, mhm.
in pursuing this track. All right, so let me tie it all together
Yes.
and let you spend a little time on every dot in the timeline. Okay. Okay. So you initially thought you were going to go into fashion, and this is based on just maybe the teen years, being very fashionable, having your own, maybe unique, eccentric style, and everybody seeing that in you. So the people around you are kind of pushing you in that direction or
Mhm.
expecting you to go into fashion. So the adults in your life also suggesting that you, apply into college for fashion. Is that how this is going? They're
Um,
suggesting a
yeah,
path
it was
for
more
you.
my peers and,
Years.
people that
Okay.
I went to school with. My parents, like I told you, they're just supportive. They just trust that I'm going to make good decisions. So
Okay.
they weren't telling me to go to school for fashion, but when I said that's
Mhm.
what I wanted to go to school for, they were like, "Okay, great."
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned Milwaukee. Is that where you grew up?
I grew up in Milwaukee, yes, Milwaukee,
Okay.
Wisconsin.
Okay. How many black people there?
People always say that. I'm telling you, y'all would be so surprised. Milwaukee is black as hell.
No,
Like,
so listen, so I actually know that because I have a girlfriend that grew up outside of Chicago, and
yeah.
that area all, she had family that lived in Milwaukee. So when she first said that, I was like, Milwaukee, really? So then I've learned, of course, since then that there are a good amount of us in
Oh
Milwaukee.
my gosh, it's fun. If you ever just need a Midwestern trip,
Uh-huh.
I suggest you go to Milwaukee. In the summer specifically, go to Milwaukee. You will not be disappointed. It's an amazing city. I love it so much.
It is on my list. I have this goal to hit all 15 states. I'm sorry, all 50 states in 15 years, 50 and
Okay.
15. So we will be there, and
I
I
was
will
about to
be
say
picking your
15 states.
brain.
You
Yeah,
giving me
right,
real
right.
Porsha Williams here. That's
Ah,
that's something Porsha would say, 15 states.
50 states in 15 years. Yes. So I will be picking your brain when we head to the Midwest.
Yes, please do. I went to school in Chicago, so I'm familiar with Milwaukee and Chicago.
Okay. 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 So where'd you go to school?
The Illinois Institute of Art, which does not exist anymore. So
Okay. All right. So while you are studying fashion, you're realizing not my passion, something I'm good at for myself, not so much for styling for others. But you are considering a job in entertainment. So thinking back to childhood, where your natural strengths were, you're like, okay, I want to pursue a job in entertainment. And,
mhm.
and and that's the point where you apply for an internship outside of the fashion industry and in entertainment.
Correct, yep.
Okay. But what did you say that internship was in fashion? But that's what took you to New York?
Yeah, so I was interning for I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo. Are you getting the echo?
No.
Okay, maybe it's just me. Yeah, I was interning at Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week, and then
Yeah.
I interned for the People's Revolution, which was also a fashion internship, and during that internship is when I was like, "I think I wanna get into music and entertainment," so
Okay.
that's when I
And so
applied to
then
Internet Vibe. Mhm.
so while you're there, so how long is this internship? Is for the summer?
So Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week was just for Fashion Week, and then
Mhm.
the People's Revolution was supposed to be for a full semester, but I left early.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now since you're physically planted in New York, you
Mhm.
take it upon yourself to look up Vibe, make your way there, make your pitch with your portfolio, and see if you
Mhm.
can get an internship there.
Yes.
Okay. By the grace of God,
I did not get kidnapped or
you did not
murdered.
get kidnapped. Actually did get to drop it off and landed the internship, which is pretty impressive because I mean it just shows moxie really to just show up somewhere.
Thank you.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So I love that story. All right. And so from there, it really just kind of takes shape. So,
Yeah.
all right. All right. So you've got the support of your family behind you. It sounds like it's not making money at this point.
No, not at
So
all.
now let's get back to, I guess, that moment then where you're kind of going from job to job, doing a lot of great work, I'm assuming, just not
Mhm.
making any money. So what are the types of roles, positions you had during that time?
So I still was working in radio,
Mhm.
while, simultaneously working in real estate. Like I said, I went and worked for it was called Boss FM at the time. It's Unmuted
Mhm.
Nation. Now it's a digital radio startup in Atlanta, which was owned by 3 millennials who are now, like, 3 of, like, my closest friends,
Oh.
from us working together. But yeah, when I talk about my life story, there's so many moving parts, like, there is nothing is linear, and I try to make it
Mhm.
make sense, which is why it gets really long-winded because 'cause I'm, like, trying to make sure every point, like, can make sense to someone who's listening.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
does get really long. But basically, long story less long, yes, that working in digital radio in Atlanta really opened up a lot of just creativity for me.
Mhm.
What Alex and Stan and Tiffany allowed me to do at Boss FM with their morning show, The Shake Up, they gave me a lot of creative kind of
Mhm.
control, a lot of creative ability there. And that was really the start of me just falling in love with production.
Uh-huh.
And so that is, a huge, huge reason why I'm in the role that I'm in today. While it's not radio, as an executive producer, is because early on in my career, I got a chance to be an executive producer when I really did
Yeah.
not have the experience to back it up. Um,
But it
but
sounds
yeah,
like you get the experience organically because you're wearing so many hats just
yes,
trying to make money, just trying to get
yeah.
a job, period, and make money.
Yeah, and I was that
Yeah.
whole time. I mean, I did real estate for years, while I was working at doing radio and
Mhm.
freelance writing. Um just I did a bunch of just side things. Like I wrote some meditations for a self-care app. I wrote a
Ah.
short film, just whatever I can do to
Mhm.
make money. And in 2016, I started my own podcast and I was
Okay.
doing that. And again, I just got that itch of like, for production, I was like, I like hosting, it's fun, but I really like the back end and like creating the
Mhm.
story. But I was noticing when I was doing my podcast, a lot of people from my hometown, Milwaukee, they were sending me podcasts to listen to that were
Mhm.
hosted by people from Milwaukee. And I had this bright idea to do a podcast festival in
Okay.
Milwaukee. So 2017, me and my friend Jadon, we founded the Milwaukee Podcast Festival, which was, a one-day festival to showcase local podcasts in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Um,
And
and we
is a physical, this isn't virtual,
No,
everything
no,
is
no, this was well before this was 2017, so
okay,
people were not
okay,
doing anything virtually at this point. It was in
okay.
Milwaukee, it was in the Arts District in Milwaukee at the Wilson Theater, which was, like, really amazing, and we had Charlemagne and Andrew, Schultz, who from the Brilliant Idiots, because I used to
Mhm.
intern, tying that story back in, I interned for Charlemagne at the Breakfast Club years prior.
Okay.
And then they had this really popular podcast, and we needed a headliner for the festival. So we hired them, and we flew them out. They headlined the festival, so that was amazing, and that was my start into like
Yeah.
podcasting.
So they're approachable at this point? I mean, you're interning. I know you're rubbing elbows and making, good connections, but they were approachable and willing to do this podcast festival that you're putting together?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I interned in 2012 and then this was 2017. So,
Mhm.
couple years removed at that point.
Okay.
And they're approachable in the fact that like we paid them. Yes.
Oh,
So it
okay.
wasn't
Let's be
it
clear.
wasn't free. Everybody's
Okay.
approachable when you're willing to cut the check.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
yeah, but that's how that went. And yeah, so Milwaukee Podcast Festival, we
Mm-hmm.
founded that. It was amazing. I did some podcast consulting for a little bit. I wrote I wrote 2 episodes for a scripted podcast called District Queen. So I was really
Okay.
getting my feet wet within the podcasting community.
Uh-huh.
And then COVID hit and I got let go from a job that I was working,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up taking a contract role at SiriusXM as a podcast partner manager. And then the rest, as they say, is
It's
history. I
history.
got that job, got promoted to EP, and then ended up leaving Sirius and going to Sony.
All right. Well, that was a major fast forward. So I'm gonna take you back a little bit more. All right.
I'm trying to be cognizant of your time because I told you I'm a
No.
talker,
We
so I will
have
talk to you.
time. Yeah, we have time. This is what I want. I want people to get an inside glimpse into production. This is one of those roles that you don't really ever hear about. You know, you
Mm,
even when watching TV credits or any credits, you see it flash. Nobody really knows what a producer does
yeah.
and the difference between a producer and an executive producer. And so I definitely want the ins and outs of all of this. So yes, please take your time. And I heard a few places in there. It sounded like you were in Atlanta at one point. But so when you're doing the podcast festival for Milwaukee, have you moved back to Milwaukee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've bounced around. So I live in Philadelphia now. Philly is the 5th city that I've lived in.
Okay.
And yeah, I've bounced around a lot. So I've lived in New York twice. I lived in Atlanta twice.
Hmm.
I lived in Chicago twice. I
Okay.
grew up in Milwaukee. And then yes, when I was doing the podcast festival, I moved back to Milwaukee for like 7 months to
Okay.
really try to get that off the ground.
And this seems to be what's necessary for the industry, that basically you go wherever the money and the opportunity takes you. So working in radio is a similar path, wherever you have an audience, wherever you get an opportunity, you just pick up and move there. So it's a lifestyle you got to be willing to embrace.
I
Um,
think so.
yeah.
I'm at an age now where that doesn't seem as appealing. Like I'm now,
Mhm.
I'm here. Philly isn't a city that I want to stay in long term, but
Mhm.
I'm in a long-term relationship. Like we're thinking about the next steps in our lives together. And so
Yeah.
I can't really be as on the go as I have been
Yeah.
previously. But I will say, if you are able to, because I know another part of that is I was very well supported by family and friends
Hmm.
and just my own kind of financial decisions of working and doing real estate that I was able to do it, even though a lot of times were really tough, but I was
Hmm.
also able to move around like that. And so I do, if you can, I would suggest it because it gave me, I mean, my network is crazy now. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like my experience is amazing. Just the way that I view the world is so wide and so open because I've lived in so many different places. So if you can,
Hmm.
you should, but I don't think that it's a requirement, especially now in this age where everything is done virtually.
Virtually. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So tell me a little bit about the process of kind of segueing from radio to podcasts.
It kind of just happened with the time, I think. I was just really, right place, right time. I was doing radio just as radio was kind of switching into more of a digital
Yeah.
format.
Hmm.
Fortunately, when I was working in Atlanta, it was a digital radio show. So we
Hmm.
technically, every time we would do the morning show, we would upload it as a podcast. We weren't calling it a podcast,
Yeah.
but we were doing that. This is what 2014, I think. And mind you, podcasting, the first podcast was uploaded, I think, in like 2005. So we definitely weren't doing anything
Ah,
new,
okay.
but we didn't
Mhm.
have the language for it. But
Right.
that same year is right when podcasting was starting to get a lot more traction. 2014 is the year that Serial came out, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And that's a lot of people's first podcast that they ever listened to. And so I just kind of was working in digital radio. And then,
Mhm.
like I said, podcasting was becoming big, I started my own because I was listening to Serial and so many other shows. I
Okay.
started my own, and then I just ended up working in podcasting. So it wasn't a huge decision. I ended up leaving Atlanta, which meant I left the radio station that I was at.
Okay.
And so I wasn't working. I was just doing real estate full time at this point when I started to do my own podcast. So that's how that change kind of
Okay.
happened.
Okay. So that was a moment where you said you just needed some steady money,
Mhm.
but instead of abandoning your dream altogether, you kind of start this freelance work and developing content for yourself.
Yeah, I was doing my
Okay.
podcast from, like, my closet,
No.
in my apartment, and the
Did it
sound was awful,
Oh.
but that's also, like, being a producer now. It's like, I can't
Yeah.
believe I did a podcast that sounded like that, but, I was just doing what I I didn't know a lot about,
Mhm.
just the audio production from the podcast front like
Yeah.
I did with radio. It's a little different, and so, yeah.
As much as it's catching on, when I first had the idea for a podcast, it was 2016, 2017.
Mhm.
And the market didn't feel as saturated, of course, as it feels right now. So at
Yeah.
the time, and I think back all the time, like, what if I had started? Look where I would be by now. But so then when I did start it, it's like I just feel like um there was just so much that happened and there's so much that I am still learning on a day-to-day basis. It feels like a little like a cult almost, just little just nuances that just most people are not familiar with or aware of, that this
Mhm.
whole world exists in podcasting. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that specifically, if you can talk about the difference, if there is any difference between producing for radio and producing for podcasts, if there's any difference at all, and the role of a producer. Talk to us about that.
So, yeah, there's a difference, particularly in the speed. When you're producing radio, you're live, right? You have maybe a couple minutes
Mhm.
to, um, I did a lot of kind of board op work too when I was at radio. So I learned a little bit differently than I think traditional radio producers learn. So I wore a lot of different hats there.
Mhm.
I think the biggest difference, yeah, it's the time that it takes to do
Okay.
something. It's the life of your work too, because when you're in radio, it's happening every day. So you're not archiving every episode. I mean, I think people are doing that now, like
Mhm.
particularly like The Breakfast Club and shows that have like a visual aspect to them. But you're not archiving all of your radio shows. And so for listeners, it's kind of like if you listen Monday through Friday, you're not really thinking about what happened Monday. Whereas with
Okay.
podcasting, we're producing stuff that's coming out weekly,
Yeah.
maybe twice a week. So people are sitting with our work a lot longer. And they're digesting it for a lot longer. It's also hard to I think this might be the case with radio too, but I'm just speaking podcast specific.
Uh-huh.
It's really hard to break through right now with podcasts. It's hard to make a hit. Like it's hard to get a
Yeah.
podcasting hit. I think with radio, it also was hard as well, but you kind of needed just moments.
Mhm.
And you just have to be really good within your market. So, right, if
Yeah.
you are in the Kansas City market, you just have to be really good in Kansas City, especially if
Yeah.
you're not syndicated. You just have to be really good in that one city to a very specific audience. With podcasting, it's a global listenership. And
Mhm.
so the expectation is that you be good globally or, at least countrywide. And that's really hard to do.
That's hard to do, and then it's hard to measure. It's
Yeah.
hard to measure success, and with the market being so you said it was difficult breaking into radio, and that makes sense because it seems like it was more of, I don't wanna say a monopoly, but you were big and you were big in that entire market, and there really
Mhm.
wasn't any room for anyone else. Whereas in
Exactly.
podcasting, there's room for everybody, and so
Yeah.
your attention is spread across so many different so much different talent and content
Mhm.
that you adjust, in a sea of salt. So I can see each of them having their complexities. But
Yeah.
in terms of, I guess, production, it seems
Mhm.
like it would be easier for you if you've come out of radio because you're used to having to develop content daily
Yeah.
versus and quality content daily
Mhm.
versus then moving to a weekly or sometimes bi-weekly, but a lot less a lot slower paced it
Yeah,
seems like
no,
yeah.
you actually hit 2 nails on their heads.
Okay.
The first one just, the barrier of entry to podcasting, right? Like that is,
Yeah.
and just rewinding back to our conversation, that was a big factor in like why I felt like podcasting was gonna be huge.
Okay.
Because working in radio, there's a lot of gatekeeping and there's only certain markets that are huge, like nationally syndicated markets,
Hmm.
right? Everything else is you're just, like I said, if you're in Kansas City, you just need to be big in Kansas City. But podcasting, there's no gatekeeping because if
Yeah.
you have a mic in your closet, like I
Yep.
did, you can make a podcast and you can create your own community that way. And so
Hmm.
that was something that was really appealing about podcasting to me. It's like, oh, people don't have to wait anymore to get
Yeah.
into a big market. You can create that from home and watch, your community grow. And the other nail that you hit was
Okay.
it is seemingly easier on the podcasting side. I think you have a little more time to do the work,
Hmm.
but the expectations, like you mentioned, are crazy because there's a wider net that you can cast in terms of capturing an audience.
Yeah.
And so with podcasting, there's a lot more pressure, I think, to make the work good and try to make it stand out. And it is so difficult to stand out in a sea of, over 2 million other shows.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough, but it's very rewarding when you do get a good show and you are able to
Hmm.
develop something. So no risk, no reward type of thing.
Okay. So what are your observations then for staying power, for being able to stand out in the crowd then? So because we see a lot of so I can speak from my experience. So if I'd started this years ago, I could come out of obscurity and still have an amazing show. But
Mhm.
now I'm competing with celebrities,
Mhm.
people who already have brand recognition, high visibility, and people just want to be able to connect directly with their favorite celebrities. And so they're, getting that attention. So if someone wants to start a podcast and they want it to be successful, like what does success even look like when you are competing with this many shows and that kind of talent?
That's such a loaded
Yeah.
question. When I spoke at the Black Pod Festival in Atlanta, like last year, Memorial Day, I
Mhm.
want to say somebody asked me a similar question. And it's really hard to answer because it depends on who you are creating it for
Okay.
and kind of I think what the expectation is. If you're an independent podcast creator and your goal is to get signed to a network,
Hmm.
um success is being signed to that network then, right? Like cuz that's your goal. If you're already working at a network like I do and it's a huge network, our goal is to get our shows to crack, a top 10 chart or, have X amount of downloads weekly on a
Uh-huh.
consistent basis for an entire year. So it looks very different for
Yeah.
everybody. And that's why it's such a hard question for me to
Yeah.
answer
Even the
because,
goal of the downloads, how is
yeah.
that goal determined?
I mean, it's a lot of back end stuff that happens. I mean, on the corporate
Hmm.
level, I'm still trying to understand how they come up with some of the forecasts and what they ask, us on the production team, what they ask of us sometimes for numbers aren't even realistic, right? Like just being
Mm.
completely transparent. It's hard to get some of the numbers that they're expecting. And so I
Hmm.
think that's when it becomes like we ask ourselves, what does success mean to us? When
Yeah.
when I was executive producing Reality with the King, that show for me, it was successful because it got so much earned media. Like there were other shows at the company that might have had, you know, 1 million downloads a month.
Hmm.
And they weren't even getting the amount of earned media that Carlos was getting, like, different online publications, like
Mm-hmm.
talking about his shows on other podcasts, talking about his show on radio shows, like that for me is successful because there weren't other shows that were actually achieving that. You know
Okay.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it really depends. It's really project based. And so success isn't, there's no blanketed answer for what success looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what I suspected. I just needed to hear it from a pro.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, on the indie, like, I have such a heart for indie podcasters because that's the world. Like, I've been an indie creator, up until the last couple years.
Okay.
And so I think the biggest thing for independent podcasters, if you're looking to just stand out from the crowd, is you have to keep doing the podcast
Yeah.
because so many people start them. And then there's so many podcasts where you go and you'll look at their feed. There might be 5 episodes and they just stop.
Yep.
Like, if you make it to 10, 20, 50 episodes, you're doing better than so many other people and you're on your way to really standing out. And that's really the biggest things. Like, you have to be really, really consistent, especially now, with the market being as saturated as it is.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, because you mentioned it, being affiliated with a network, what that means, being independent versus with a network, and someone starting a podcast independently, but wanting to move toward aligning with a network, the pros and the cons of doing that.
If you're looking to be on a network, you have to be okay with being told what to do.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people forget that part. It's like the goal is to be signed to a network because, the cachet that comes with saying like you're on this podcast label, or um, these people are your label mates.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're looking to sign people to networks, it's because we want to have a lot of kind of creative direction, and we need to,
Okay.
quite frankly, put our hands into the project a lot more. And if you're very precious with your creativity and with your project,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want someone like me coming in and, giving you a new segment to do, or telling you this segment that you're doing doesn't really work, you should take it out, or you should change
Yeah.
it this way. If you're someone who doesn't like that type of direction, a network probably isn't for you.
Yeah.
It may be more of like a deal where you sign with a company who's going to sell ads for your podcast, because a lot of people want to sign with networks because they just want like the ad sell help or the marketing help. And there
Ah.
are agencies and companies out there that will help you just sell ads into your podcast or help
Mm-hmm.
you with marketing. But if you want a network that has an executive producer, like a production team,
Mm-hmm.
there's a production team for a reason. And like, we are going to have to come in and like produce the show for you. So those are some of the major differences.
Okay. Yeah. And I was looking at it and it sounds about the same as an artist who ends up getting signed to a label. So if they start out as an
100%.
independent artist, they have complete creative control over their material, their look, all of that. But then once you go with a label, then you kind of relinquish a little bit of that control.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about some, because you've just organically told us about some of the complexities of building a career, the hardship of, not making money initially, but now you're making money. So what other hardships might someone who's breaking into this industry and going the production route, what would they experience? Or let's personalize it. Tell me some of the things that you experienced. Was it hard as a woman? Was it hard as a Black woman? Did you have any types of barriers to breaking into the industry in that regard?
I have a really, I don't want to say controversial viewpoint, but
Okay.
if there were any hardships that were because I was Black or a woman, I wasn't aware of them,
Okay.
right? Not
Mhm.
saying that they didn't happen. Like, maybe there were opportunities that I didn't get, and that was the reason why. But it's never been like a blatant,
Mm.
like, we don't want you because you are X and Y. You know what
Okay.
I'm saying? So I wouldn't be able to speak to that. I think some of my own, I think we can become our own, we can create issues where they don't really exist,
Mhm.
particularly when we are looking to make career pivots or um, apply for roles that we don't think we're qualified for. I think a lot of the fear is self-created.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you a quick story. I was a partner manager for Pandora, which was SiriusXM owns Pandora as well, right? So I was a
Okay.
partner manager for podcasts on Pandora, and my boss is this older white man, right? And so we got along really great. The executive producer role for More Sauce was open. I didn't even think I was qualified to like apply for that for an
Mm-hmm.
executive producer role because I was like, I haven't done like traditional podcast production. Like I've done radio production, but I
Uh-huh.
hadn't done traditional podcast production at that level. I did it independently where I was using like, Audacity and you know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
the indie software, but I hadn't done it at that level. And this older white man was like, I think you would be great for this. And I think you have what it takes. And it's a lot less about the technical ability and just like
Mm-hmm.
the natural like leadership ability and like creative intuition.
Okay.
Right. So it's like that's an instance where I think it was the opposite of like that's something that worked for you because you're Black and a woman,
Yeah.
someone who's, not traditionally supposed to be looking out for me,
Mm-hmm.
what in the biggest way looked out for me. Not only did he tell me to apply, he wrote the recruiter that was hiring for the role and said, "This is a superstar. Like you need to hire her."
Mm.
He wrote the VP of podcast at the time, who was also another white man, and was like, "This woman works for me now, but I think she would be amazing for this role." So it was very, if we look at what I think society has told us to kind of
Yeah.
expect.
Uh-huh.
That wasn't supposed to happen. And not only did it happen, but he's still a huge advocate for me to this day. Like, can call him right now for advice, for lunch, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Older white man that just didn't want anything other than to watch me be really successful.
Yeah. I love that. I love that story. And it's still a great thing to include here because, we have these conversations about allies, about
Mhm,
mentorship,
mhm.
about imposter syndrome, and you talking yourself out of something that he believed that you were skilled and talented enough to do and pursue. So it says a lot about the importance of looking to those around you for, and I don't want to say validation, but just to solidify that you have what it takes to move within this space. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I'm not a person that's struggled with confidence in terms of I'm very confident in terms of speaking with people. Like
Hmm.
I have been since I can remember walking up to anybody that I want to meet and introducing myself to
Okay.
them. So
Hmm.
I've never struggled with confidence in terms of talking and speaking. But I was when I got into the executive producer role, I was struggling with like, am I smart enough? Because I was working with these other executive producers who
Hmm.
came from like NPR and they came from
Mm.
these very serious, very journalistic
Yeah.
publications. And I was like, I'm just plugged from partner management. Like I've done some indie stuff, I've done some radio stuff, but I didn't have the pedigree that they had. So I did
Okay.
struggle a little bit with like, am I smart enough to be in the same class as them?
Okay.
So that is something I would say that was a hardship for me because, and it was self-imposed because they
Yeah.
never made me feel like,
That's what I was going to ask you.
yeah, no, they never made me feel like that at all. It was just something
Okay.
I went in and I was like, I see these people are so smart and they're so creative,
Hmm.
and they're so cerebral in their creativity. And I didn't see myself that way. And all they did was be supportive of me and help me. Right. So it was like I was sitting here with imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And they're just looking at me like, hey, this is a cool new executive producer and she's new at the job. So we're helping her with the job, but it's not that she can't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, I think, a hardship that was probably just self-imposed.
Okay. And it sounds like there is, if they're coming from these very, like you said, highbrow, well, you didn't say that, but
But
journal
mhm.
journalism environments, but you are more in tune to the culture. So you
And that
round out the talent.
mhm,
Yeah.
100%. That is definitely something I learned of like, yeah, I didn't go to a really prestigious university. You know what I mean? Like a lot of my experience, I'm self-taught in a lot of things.
Hmm.
But there is value in that as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's what, that's another thing that I really want independent creators and people coming up to just understand like there is value in whatever you know, because
Yeah.
whatever you know it very well, right?
Yeah.
Like I always say this, like I'm myself in a very loud way. Not that I'm a loud person, but I'm just who I am in a very loud way. So when I meet people, I'm gonna find a way to relate to them about where they're from. I've lived in 5 cities. I probably have some overlap with, where
Yeah.
you might be from or somewhere that you might have visited. I know entertainment, I know pop culture, I know music, I know those things very, very well. So I'm always gonna be very good at creating within those parameters and,
Okay.
with those ideas. Um, and I'm just a people person. And so like there is value in that. But yeah, I had to really learn that.
Yeah.
And it started with kind of the first executive producer role that I got within podcasting.
Okay. Okay. All right. So tell me, how does this being a reality TV addict, how did that support you breaking into the industry?
Um Again, it makes you in tune with the culture,
Uh-huh.
right? Like I love watching people. I could watch people for hours. So I will watch any reality TV show at least once, right?
Okay.
And reality TV as a genre is huge. So typically when you're
Yeah.
talking to people, there's a reference somewhere that I'll make that someone might catch on to or they might
Okay.
get. And so that's helped me a lot. It's helped me in development. It's helped me with talent meetings for sure.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I
Okay.
hope that answers your question.
Yeah, 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 it does.
Okay.
So how can people prepare for breaking into executive production? Well, let's do this. Can you explain the difference between production and executive production?
Yes. Um, Podcast specific,
Okay.
like your executive producer oversees the entire production team. So you have associate producers, um, senior
And that's
producers.
tiered. That's tiered. Associate producers, then
Yeah,
producers.
so your
Okay.
associate producer is gonna be like your entry level producer. When you get to producer, that's I would say the midway point,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
So that's somebody that is, very good at cutting tape. They're good at development. They might just need to get the speed or, brush up their editorial skills a little bit. Then you get to senior producer. That person for me is kind of like the next in line for the executive producer. So that's somebody that can do all of the technical stuff and
Mm-hmm.
all of the editorial stuff. And they have really good instincts and they're really good with working cross functionally with other teams, right? Because at that
Mm-hmm.
level now you're working with your marketing team within the way that it's set up at like on the corporate level. You're
Mm-hmm.
working cross functionally with a lot of teams, and so that's what the executive producer does. I oversee all of those people, and then I oversee all of the relationships with our cross-functional teams.
Okay.
So, like when marketing needs something or we're launching a show and we have to have a meeting around how we're going to market the show, I'm in those meetings, and then I'm kind of adding my own input with sales in those meetings, finance in those meetings. I'm doing a lot of development directly to our head of podcast and our VPs. So
Mm-hmm.
it's less in the weeds of the kind of day to day, like cutting tape and, writing scripts, and more
Mm-hmm.
of like high level kind of oversight into like everything that's going on with all of the shows. So
Okay.
I'm executive producing 3 shows right now, 2 that have launched and 1 that's launching in May. So I'm overseeing the teams for all 3 of those shows, plus everything cross-functionally.
And are you developing? Are you constantly in motion for developing new shows?
Yep, I have a
Okay.
talent meeting tomorrow for a show that I developed, and so there's a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the executive producer is kind of the person who um, manages all of those parts
Mm-hmm.
at kind of each step and each level.
Okay. And I would assume that maybe some of these roles or departments don't exist depending on the size of the company. So, like
Correct.
you said, you're with a Sony right now. So,
Mhm.
is Sony, will a smaller company have internal marketing teams as
Right.
part of, so that will vary depending on the size then.
For sure. And it could like what you do as an executive producer could vary as well. It's just like, film and TV production, a producer could mean so many different things. Sometimes when you watch a movie, you see executive producer, that could just mean that that person contributed financially to that film
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
got the executive producer credit, or that could mean they might be a producer because they helped find um, you know, investors or somebody else, and then they become the producer there. At a smaller company, though,
Uh-huh.
you might, as the executive producer, be marketing. Like you might also be the person to like put
Okay.
the marketing plan together. You might be the person that is going out and finding another agency that's going to help you with your ad sales. You
Okay.
might be the social media manager for the podcast. If you are an indie creator, you're going to be all of those things. Plus
Mm-hmm.
the talent and the host for your podcast.
Right.
So there's a point where you can wear every single hat if you're working with a smaller company or if you're working independently.
Yeah. And then there's some roles that you're mentioning that I guess, I never really even think of in terms of radio or podcasting, and that's editorial. And
Mhm.
that is a part of producing content for the show daily, is
Yeah.
that there's writers and editors.
Mhm.
Would not have
Mhm.
thought of that.
Yeah, but with your podcast, you are all of those things. You're the
Yeah.
writer, you're the editor, you're social media, you're marketing, you're PR, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like you're wearing all the hats. And yeah, when you work, in a big corporation, that's typically handled by other teams.
Mhm. So we mentioned rubbing elbows earlier. What's that relationship like? I mean, you have worked with some major talent. So I mentioned being approachable earlier. I mean, what's the just working with celebrity talent? You've mentioned shows like the Breakfast Club, just so many. Tell me what it's like working on a day-to-day basis with just, such large and visible talent.
I think since I've been doing it like a decade now, it
Mhm.
really just feels like a part of the job.
Mhm.
Like I don't get starstruck, it, if at all, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure there are people that I haven't met yet that I probably would be a little
Uh-huh.
flustered by, but I
Uh-huh.
think I learned just early on that like celebrities or really visible people, they are
Just
people
like
just like
you.
me. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that actually makes it easier to approach them, honestly, because it's like, well, I mean, you could say no, but there's no foul in me asking you
Yeah.
or approaching you or coming up to you or sending you an email. Like I've sent emails to Beyonce's publicist to try to like book her for stuff.
Mhm.
Has she responded? Absolutely not. But I'm not afraid to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's either going to be a yes or a no, or in this case, a no response. But one day I might get a response. So
Oh my goodness, that sounds like such a challenging part of the job. Just booking talent, period. Just being able to track people down, for teams to be responsive, and to have to do that. I mean, for a podcast, I mean, I guess especially when you have a large team, to do that on a week to week basis. But I could not imagine booking guests for a daily show, something like the Breakfast Club and those types of shows.
yeah, the guest booking is definitely challenging. And that's something I would say if you are like a guest focused podcast or whatever
Mhm.
you're trying to create, TV show, whatever. If you're
Mhm.
guest focused, I would invest in hiring someone who has experience with booking talent because
Mm.
you will eventually like find your rhythm
Mhm.
within booking, but it's also kind of hard to do. Like you said, you have to track people down. So
Yeah.
it's like I could send you, Marcia, an email to ask if you're interested, and then you'll email me back and say yes. So now I have to figure out with your schedule and the talent schedule what
Yep.
day we can make it work. And then it's like, is it virtual? Is it in person? If it's in person, what are the logistics to like getting you to where we are? Like there's so many things that go into booking.
Mhm.
Unless you're a person that already has a wide range of contacts, then it's easier for you because you're probably just saying, hey, can you do this? Or hey, can you connect me with such and such? But I
Mhm.
would say, just as a tip for independent creators, if you can invest in a booker and your show relies heavily on guests,
Mhm.
I would do that.
Okay. What other investments do you think are worth it?
Equipment, So like microphones, if you're doing a podcast, like the audio experience is so, I don't think people understand, especially in a sea of 2 million plus or however many million podcasts there are,
Yeah.
to stand out to outside of being consistent. If I listen to your show in the first 2 minutes, the audio is bad, or like I have
Yeah.
to turn my volume all the way up and I can still barely hear you, or
Yeah.
there's background noises, I'm turning it off, right? And that's
Yeah.
the difference between like getting your podcast out to people and just kind of only capturing a really small audience, because some people don't care, but for the majority of people, the audio experience is important. So definitely invest in a really good
Absolutely.
mic. Like the Shure microphones are amazing. I would invest in maybe Pro Tools for your audio editing if you can get a license. So those are some of the other investments. I also will say, you know, if you're doing narrative stuff or anything that involves heavy research, if you aren't
A
familiar
savvy
with how to
researcher.
properly research, hire a researcher. I would say that. So yeah, it's just, it depends on what the project is. But I will say just universally, please get the sound equipment together.
First and foremost.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Any wild stories with any of your celebrity talent or crazy industry stories?
Oh my gosh. I would say a really interesting one. I went to Sierra's birthday party like some year, like I think this was 2012. It was
Okay.
definitely when I was living in New York the first time. And Sierra is one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen in real life. Like she is like a Barbie doll. And she kept thinking like something was wrong with her outfit the whole night. And I remember like watching her and I'm just like, you are so perfect right now. Like nothing is wrong with you. I remember we were going to take a picture with her and she's like, wait, I gotta fix this, I gotta fix that. And I'm like, I remember thinking in my head, like, bitch, you are perfect. Like you are beautiful. Like you don't have to fix a thing. So that experience always like sticks out to me in my mind when especially when I think of celebrities as like these highly visible people. I'm like, they're just like us. They have insecurities like us. They worry about how they look just like us. And so that's one that I can just call back to now. But I mean, I don't know. Me and Carlos and I have a lot of experiences just because we always cut up. And I know that's like, you're
I
a
can
human being.
imagine
Yeah. So like,
what work must
he,
be like working with
yeah,
Carlos
he's
King.
so, I will say he is one of my favorite people to just work with. I just called him the other day and we just, every time I call him, I'm like, I just need 5 minutes. It's 30 minutes later. And we're like, okay, we got to get off the phone, you know? So he is so much fun to work with. And I'm really glad it worked out like that because, you know, there are people that I've met that I thought would be really cool and really fun and they didn't turn out to be that way. So I'm really glad that he is exactly what I thought he was going to be.
I love it. I love it. And it sounds like it sounds like he's doing that independently now. Is it still network affiliated or has Kingdom Reign taken over?
Not that I know of. Like I know
Okay.
he's not with he's not on More Sauce anymore, and he's
Yeah.
not with SiriusXM / Stitcher anymore.
His icon, his logo appears on the podcast
Yeah,
cover art
yeah,
now.
I saw that. That's such a Carlos thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you said you had a story about him talking about your voiceover talent?
Oh my God, yes, his trailer for Reality with the King.
Uh-huh.
If you listen to the trailer, there's a person in the beginning that is like talking with this British accent, and it's me. And so we
Okay.
we did that. And so when I was like updating my website, I was like, I'm gonna put that I'm a voiceover actress. And we were just cutting up and like laughing about that. Cause it's like, girl, you're not really a voiceover actress. And the accent was very, very bad. But go off.
Okay, got you. All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I didn't actually put that in the introduction then. I was like, oh, we have that in common.
Yeah, no, I'm not, definitely not professionally. Like I've done, like when I said I wrote some self-care, some meditations for a self-care app. They had me do the voiceover for that too, but I'm not a serious like voiceover artist at all.
Got you. Got you. Okay. So what's next for you?
TV and film.
All
Yeah.
right. Tell me more. Tell me more.
So I am developing. Well, I developed a TV show, and it was in kind of like the pitch stages. I got rejected from one place. They didn't want to buy it, but it's still being pitched, and then I'm still developing some other stuff. I just got done writing a holiday movie that I'm gonna be pitching, a documentary that I'm working on,
Okay.
and then like another unscripted thing. So I have 3 different projects that I'm actively working on right now, with the 4th being kind of complete and in the pitch stage. So, but that's a very long process as well. Like that's not something that I'm even expecting to really pop off for me even within a year. It would be amazing if it does.
Okay.
And I don't know, I'm really lucky. So a lot of things really do work out for me. So maybe it'll happen
Yeah.
within a year.
And I'm watching the time, but I hope, but would you be willing to talk about that? Because that would be really helpful too, to give people the nuances of actually developing and pitching something.
Sure. Yeah, I'm free.
Okay.
What would you like to know? There's so many different ways to start. So
Let's start from ideation. So a person that has an idea but just doesn't think they have the types of connections or
Mhm.
background to develop and get it um, in front of people who can really make decisions and make it happen, have it see the light of day.
I think you have to do that. You know, if you have an idea and you think the idea is really, really good, first get it on paper. So like write it out, write out the beats. If it's a movie, right? Write it out scene by scene, like what happens between scene 1 and scene 50. Like
Mhm.
what is happening scene by scene? Who are your characters? And really kind of describing the characters in a way that seems like it's not going to matter. But it is going to matter. So
Okay.
really coming up with the characters, and I would say making sure you understand how each character relates to the other one. So that's all things you're doing before you even start writing a script.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so then once you have that in a log line, so like really in 1 or 2 sentences, what is this about? Once you have that, then you can start writing a script. And then I would say the first script doesn't have to be the best. You just need to write a script so you can get the movie done.
Okay.
Right. So your first script there's a 99% chance it's going to suck by the time you get to the finished product, but you have to just get it out there.
Uh-huh.
And so get that. And then like the visual is also important. So a really good deck is gonna be what you will be sending to, if you don't have an agent,
Mhm.
to represent you, that's what you're going to be sending to an agent to get them even interested in representing you. And that's like a overview of what your story is about. And I'm using a script like a movie as an example because it's the easiest one
Okay.
to point to, but the deck is going to kind of have a title page, and then a log line page, and then an about page, and then kind
Mhm.
of breaking the movie down scene by scene, breaking
Mhm.
your main cast of characters down, and who they are, how they relate to each other, and
Mhm.
making it really visually appealing. And so that is kind of where you can get started uh, with, I would say, a scripted idea.
Okay.
Once you have those things, finding representation. Now, some people can, pitch themselves and they don't need agents. I just think having that buffer and having that protection of having an agent is the way that I wanted to do it. So
Mhm.
I don't have an agent, but I have an agent that is representing me on a project. So she's not my official agent yet,
Okay.
but she's representing me on this current project. And if that goes well, then fingers crossed, she will be like my actual agent.
Gotcha. Okay, so you mentioned visual. So it sounds like nothing actually has to be recorded per se, but it
Right.
does have to be scripted, and you do have to be able to explain the scene, explain the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to be able to paint a picture.
Mhm.
There's a really good deck for, the show Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Now that's an episodic show, but it's a scripted show. Their deck is phenomenal. Like I looked at it. It wasn't even titled Stranger Things when they wrote that deck, and that
Uh-huh.
it goes to show how much the story is going to change over time. But the
Mhm.
core pieces are there, right? It's like this. It's set in this small town. In the past, and there's this kind of scientific governmental experiment happening that they don't want people to know about, and there are these children that are the central figures to this story. So those elements are there, but the title is a completely different title than what we ended up having now. But the deck is so good. I'm reading through it and I'm like, if I was an exec, I would buy this and I would develop it. So I can
So is the deck accessible to the public?
it is, yeah.
Okay, tell me about that. How do people access? How do people know these things? I mean, I guess if you're in the industry, you know, but
yeah, I think somebody tweeted that their deck, or it might have been a website that there are websites that have scripts on them, so you can go and like read scripts for different movies and see how the writers kind of like wrote these things out, and also see the differences in like what the script says versus how you've experienced those characters in that movie when you actually watch it. So a lot of this stuff is out there. I like I said, I think with the Stranger Things deck, I think someone tweeted it or I found it on the website. I could send it to you though, because it's that good. It's one of those things for me that every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to make my next deck because it's so good. And I've actually like made decks with kind of that as my inspiration. So I can send it.
Please share that. I can put it in the episode notes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been awesome. Look, I got so many gems I didn't even know I was digging for.
Thank you. I am so long-winded and I can be all over the place. That's just how my brain works. I hope it, as can become cohesive, once people listen. And the biggest thing is just be really bold with, what you want to do. If it's a podcast, like don't be afraid to start your podcast. I know we talked a lot about the market being overly saturated, but there's still room for you to create, and all it takes is consistency, and all it takes is for you to start to really kind of do something that could potentially change your life.
Yeah, I love that. And so, your example, your story today, I think is, it shows where some people fall short. So you being in New York, taking it upon yourself to just waltz into Vibe and say, I'm here and this is what I have. At least you had a destination. You had an address, albeit an outdated address, but for someone who does do the work to develop that deck, they do their research. Sometimes they just don't know the next step. They don't know how to get it into hands, or to even know, like we said, to access good examples of decks. So when you don't know that, it's hard to, determine your next steps. So do you have any suggestions for navigating that?
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people, myself included, we get to a point in our career where a lot of things are second nature to us. So we can't fathom not knowing. Right. Like I can't fathom not knowing how to reach out to someone and ask them to connect me to somebody, or reaching out to an agent, or writing a script, or creating a deck. I can't fathom not knowing it, but it's only because I've had the luxury of doing it now for a while. And so I would say ask someone who knows. If you yourself don't know, somebody in your life or a connection of someone in your life has to know, right? And you just have to ask. And like, people are assholes sometimes, and like they won't respond, or they'll say no, but just continue asking, because I don't know about everybody else. I learn the best when I'm actually able to like do things and watch other people do them. That's just how my brain works. And so if you are that kind of person, you ask someone, if it's a podcast producer and you want to be a podcast producer, like, hey, do you mind if I spend, an hour on a Zoom with you while you cut some tape? I really want to learn how to do this, but I've never done it before. They might say no, but somebody's going to say yes to you. So the biggest takeaway is like, ask for what you want, because you will never get it if you don't ask. That's a guarantee. You are 100% not going to get it if you don't ask.
Well, I have to say, I'm surprised at how often LinkedIn is mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you use LinkedIn a lot?
I do. That was actually how you and I connected initially, was on LinkedIn.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know if it was Instagram. Yeah, like LinkedIn is an amazing way. I'll say, Marceia, something that you do that I love, like you constantly create value for yourself, right? Like when you reach out to someone, you don't just like introduce yourself. It's like, hey, I am Marceia and I do X, Y, and Z. I would love to like show you X, Y, and
Mhm.
Z, right? So you're always constantly creating value to yourself, and you're very persistent as well. And like, you don't just, if somebody's like, okay, thanks, I don't have a need for this. It's not like you never reach out to them again. You're like, oh, I got another angle for you. You know what I mean? Like, there's something else.
You caught that?
Yeah. I love that. That is 100%, you know, those are tactics that like I've used. I still do, right? Like what is that saying? If one door closes, a window opens.
Yeah.
I love people who are like, the door might have closed, but I found a window. I found a little doggy entry from the back door. There's a basement, there's a cellar door that I can go through. Like I love people like that. So that you should actually teach a class on just how to constantly, you know, reach out to people without feeling like you're overdoing it, but reaching out just enough to where you stay at the top of their mind, and then always creating value for yourself. So that's what I would say is like, you know, people could take a page out of your book, just ask and have some value when you ask.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Well, listen, I can let you get back to your day, but is there anything you want to close out with? Any wisdom, guidance, any more than you've already shared, or point us to some of your projects?
So you can listen to, I have two podcasts out right now that just launched with Sony Entertainment Podcasts. One is called It's Giving Fashion, and it is hosted by Shea Coulee, who is the All Stars 5 winner of RuPaul's Drag Race and just an iconic drag queen. Like so much fun. So listen to that every Thursday wherever you get your podcast. And then our newest baby is called The Social Dose, which is like your go-to for all things social media that are happening in social media. It's like the yesification of news.
Yesification. Okay.
It's so much fun. It's hosted by Paris Nicholson and Michael Judson Berry. Their first episode had Candace Dillard Bassett from the Real Housewives of Potomac on as a correspondent. So you can find that podcast comes out every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. So those are the two things that I have out now, but stay tuned. Like I'm always working, always developing. So I'm sure in a couple of months, I'll have something else that people can check out.
All right. Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I talk so much, Marceia. I should have warned you about that. Like, I talk so much that I often forget, like, what the initial point was that I was trying to make.
I do the same thing.